You know where religion comes from, the word?
All right, let's see it.
You know, I love, like I talked about sin earlier, to miss the mark.
It kind of sounds like what you might like is etymological fallacies, because the etymologies of these words don't necessarily have anything to do with what they are used to mean.
Religion is from the Latin root religare. Ligare means to bind together. Re means again.
So there are a few things to note here. To begin, we don't actually have a clear idea of what the etymological root of the Latin word religio is. There are two candidates that are most commonly cited, and we'll get to that, but whichever one is more accurate, if either is more accurate than the other, doesn't really bear on how the word was used in antiquity and what it was used to mean. And the same is true of the modern use of the English word religion, which took on very different significance following the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment. Now, another thing to note is there's no such thing as religion apart from discourse or discussion about religion. It is a social construct. It is not any kind of agent or power or force or anything like that apart from our discourse. And then finally, the two candidates for the etymology for the word religion are one that comes from ligare and the other comes from legere. Now, legere was promoted by Cicero in the 1st century BCE in his text on the nature of the gods. And the idea was that religion is a set of responsibilities and expectations related to society and relationships with the gods. And so in ritual, in the texts, you have all these expectations, all these standards, and so you need to read and adhere to them. Now, at the beginning of the 4th century CE, we had an author named Lactantius who suggested, based on an appeal to the writings of Lucretius from the 1st century BCE, that it was related to ligare, to bind or to tie. And the idea there was that the expectations of religio bound someone to these social standards, these behavioral norms, and these relationships with the divine. So we have two different ideas that were presented in antiquity. Whether or not one is actually accurate and the other is not, we see the word religio being used in reference to both across the various contexts and genres and types of text in which we see the word. So the word could be used in a variety of different ways in antiquity, and those varieties of different ways are not identical to what the word would come to mean by the time of the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Religion is about restoration. Got a bunch of spiritual friends who say they're not religious, and you know what they're telling me? Is they want unity. What religion means.
So this is not entirely accurate, because even if we do accept the legare etymology, the idea of tying or binding is not about reconciliation. It's not about tying or binding people together or restoration. It's about binding people to behavioral norms and social expectations. So there's one text where somebody says they were invited to dinner and they said, "I had religio, I could not turn it down." The idea there is I had scruples. I honor social expectations and norms and behavioral standards, and so I had to accept. And so it doesn't just have to do with the relationship between humanity and deity. It can just have to do with normal social relationships between people, which is why even St. Augustine didn't like applying the word religio to Christianity, because it said this has to do with all kinds of different relationships, including relationships between people, not necessarily just relationships between people and God. And so some translators will render religio as scruples, and some scholars will define it as scrupulosity, that it has to do with this internal impulse to honor and obey expectations related to social relationships or to rituals and relationships with deity. So it is a much broader term than either the notion of a set of beliefs and practices related to deity or McConaughey's notion that this is about restoration or reconciliation or coming together. And if you would like a more thorough discussion, the second chapter of my dissertation that I ultimately pulled out of the dissertation because it disrupted the flow quite a bit dedicates more than 20,000 words to describing how the concept of religion developed from the ancient world down to today, as well as how it developed within scholarship and why scholars should probably stop using the term today when talking about the ancient world. And if you would like a lot of other literature talking about the concept of religion, where it comes from and what it means, here are a number of texts that you can go check out, some a little more accessible than others.
We bastardized it along the way. We made it a business. I don't believe that the original creators of religion, Muhammad and Jesus and God, are going, yeah, that's fine.
So there's not really an original creator of religion. Again, it is not an object, an agent, or a force. It has no sui generis existence outside of discourse. It is a social construct. It is whatever people say it is. And so it was not created by Jesus, by Muhammad, or by God, and the Latin term religio was used to refer to a wide variety of different things in the ancient world, and was not remotely coterminous with the way we use the term today, nor is the ancient use more correct or true than the way it is used today. But our contemporary notion was developed primarily within the Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment, as well as within medieval Islamic philosophy related to the concept of deen. And you can check out this article for a very thorough discussion of that.
No, there's even stories in the Bible about going, no, that ain't fine.
There aren't really any references to religio or religion anywhere in the Bible. I would say the closest we come to that is the letter of James, where in chapter 2 he talks about thriskia, that is undefiled and pure, which is to help the fatherless and the widow in their distress and keep oneself unstained from the world. But that's also not really translatable as religion as we understand the concept today. That has more to do with, again, those scruples, those social expectations, and those responsibilities to other people around you as well as to deity.
But, so we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I just pose the question to us to say, maybe it's not religion we're mad at. Maybe we need to restore what that means. Restore its original meaning and live that way instead of just accepting what it's become in so many places, in so many ways.
I don't think restoring it to how it was used in the ancient world is going to accomplish quite what McConaughey hopes it will accomplish here. But I think it is a good discussion to have, and I would be happy to carry on that discussion if Matthew would like to learn more about the history and the origins of the word religio and the concept of religion, which is quite different from the way it is presented in that video. And the fit for this video has been the goddess Aurora Monroe, aka Storm.